Imagine ripping up a fragile peace treaty just to restock your strategic oil reserves, knowing full well that doing so might immediately choke off a fifth of the world's energy supply. Welcome to the Clara Show Daily World Brief for July 18th, 2026. Today we are looking at a glaring global pattern of leaders actively choosing escalation while systematically dismantling the very guardrails meant to keep us safe. And we're starting with a harsh reality in the Middle East. The United States-Iran ceasefire has collapsed in the deadliest possible way. On Friday, an Iranian ballistic missile and drone attack on the Al-Azraq base in Jordan killed 2 U.S. service members.
The human cost here is just, no, it's devastating. 1 service member still missing and 4 others had to be medically evacuated. This attack on Friday brings the total number of U.S. service members killed to 16 since this war officially began back on February 28, 2026.
And that's just on the U.S. side. Over the past 3 weeks alone, U.S. strikes have killed over 50 people. So the temporary ceasefire, that June 17 Memorandum of Understanding, is completely dead. President Trump officially declared the agreement over and ordered a resumption of military strikes,
which prompted Iran to immediately retaliate by blocking the Strait of Hormuz. That's a massive choke point for global energy exports. And they've also begun targeting U.S. Gulf allies. It really points to a monumental miscalculation on both sides, driven heavily by a glaring lack of seasoned diplomatic expertise.
That lack of expertise is structural now. Secretary of State Marco Rubio systematically cleared out the State Department's Iran specialists. So we are operating without that foundational institutional knowledge in the room.
When you remove specialized diplomats, you fundamentally lose the ability to understand your adversary's threshold for pain and their strategic calculus. The administration is relying on negotiators whose backgrounds are largely in real estate and domestic politics. They're treating foreign adversaries like corporate rivals. In real estate, you can walk away from a deal to force a lower price. In geopolitics, walking away from this specific deal means incoming ballistic missiles.
Which explains Vice President J.D. Vance recently suggesting that the June 17 Memorandum of Understanding was primarily just a breather. He claimed it as a way to replenish U.S. strategic oil reserves before getting back into the fight. It's like calling a timeout in a boxing match just to take a sip of water, but while you do, your opponent is locking the doors to the arena. Nobody is actually getting out of the ring.
That is a highly dangerous transactional mindset. And you can see how badly it's failing when you look at the rhetoric from Iran. Iranian Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei, who, by the way, has remained completely unseen since his father's assassination at the start of the war, responded to the collapse of the deal by publicly stating that the U.S. president's signature is, quote, worthless.
But if the original ceasefire was meant to prevent a depression-level economic crisis, how does ripping it up and triggering the closure of the Strait of Hormuz serve the public interest just months before the November midterms?
It doesn't serve the public interest at all. The concrete consequences are immediate. We are instantly facing escalating inflation and severely disrupted energy markets. When 20% of the world's energy exports are suddenly trapped, the resulting price shocks ripple through every single household budget. Plus, we're looking at the terrifying potential of a ground invasion to secure those shipping lanes. That would mark a direct return to the forever war doctrine.
So we are seeing leaders opt for short-term political posturing over pragmatic diplomacy. And that brings us to a very similar fracturing of military structures and alliances happening right now in Eastern Europe.
Yes, Ukraine's internal command structure and their external European alliances are both under immense strain. Internally, Ukrainian soldiers are expressing massive outrage right now following President Zelensky's decision to oust the highly popular defense minister, Mikhailo Fedorov. He's been replaced by Yevgeny Kamara.
Soldiers on the ground credit Fedorov as the architect of modernizing their military. He cut through all that old Soviet-era bureaucracy and heavily integrated technologies like drones and Starlink access,
which have been absolutely pivotal for battlefield survival. Fedorov understood that data and drone logistics are force multipliers. The modern battlefield requires extreme agility and technological integration to offset a larger adversary's numerical advantage.
Reports from the front lines claim Fedorov was pushed out because he clashed with General Alexander Syrsky. And the troops actually have a very specific nickname for him. They derisively call him General 200, or sometimes simply the Butcher. What exactly does General 200 mean in this context?
Cargo 200 is an old Soviet military code used for transporting the bodies of dead soldiers. So calling him General 200 tells you exactly how the front lines view his strategic mindset. He is seen as a traditionalist who relies on high-casualty attrition warfare.
Replacing an innovator like Fedorov with a Soviet-minded commander has to severely demoralize the troops. It signals a shift from trying to outsmart the enemy with technology to merely trying to outbleed them.
Reverting to obsolete top-down command structures prioritizes internal political hierarchy over operational effectiveness and troop survival. And while the internal command is fraying, their external alliances are facing a massive crisis. Ukraine's relations with Poland have completely plunged.
Because President Zelensky recently bestowed the honorary title Heroes of the UPA on a military unit. For some context, the UPA was a World War II-era Ukrainian nationalist group that was responsible for the massacre of up to 100,000 Poles.
Which is an incredibly sensitive historical nerve to strike, especially with your most crucial geographic ally. In direct response to Zelensky honoring this group, Polish President Karol Nawrocki strips Zelensky of the Order of the White Eagle, which is Poland's highest order.
And this isn't just a symbolic diplomatic spat. The Polish far-right opposition is now heavily attacking Prime Minister Donald Tusk's government for providing Ukraine with PATC-3 Patriot interceptor missiles. The opposition claims that giving away these advanced air defense systems leaves Poland defenseless. Is Ukraine alienating its most steadfast neighbor over an 80-year-old historical dispute exactly when it needs Patriot missiles to survive the autumn?
It certainly looks that way. When you look at both of these moves together, the internal firing of Fedorov and the external spat with Poland, it paints a picture of a leadership prioritizing political loyalty and nationalistic pride over pragmatic, life-saving coalition building. Without Fedorov's technological innovations and without those PATC-3 Patriot missiles from Poland, Ukrainian citizens and soldiers are left highly vulnerable to Russian attacks.
That breakdown of alliances over political pride isn't just happening in Eastern Europe. It is literally sparking political conflict in North America as well. As of the episode date, there are 955 active fires burning across Canada, destroying nearly 3 million hectares of land. The resulting smoke has blanketed the northern United States, recently giving Detroit the worst air quality of any city in the world.
The scale of this natural disaster is immense. It requires cross-border coordination to manage safely.
But instead of collaborating, President Trump threatened Canada with new tariffs over the, quote, filthy air, publicly accusing Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney of willful negligence. Threatening economic tariffs over windblown smoke feels a bit like suing your neighbor because a cloud rained on your lawn.
Well, Ontario Premier Doug Ford dismissed the rhetoric entirely. He pointed out that Canada is deploying immense resources, over 150 fire crews, 80 water bombers, and helicopters to fight the blazes. Ford also reminded the U.S. that Canada routinely sends its own crews to help fight American fires when the situation is reversed.
It's not just a North American problem, though. Firefighters globally are facing what is being called a fire wave, and it's causing total operational collapse in places like Spain, the United Kingdom, and France.
The sheer volume of simultaneous blazes means crews in those countries are being forced to make battlefield-style triage decisions. They literally have to decide which fires to fight and which to abandon because there simply aren't enough resources to suppress everything.
And inside the U.S., the capacity to even understand these disasters, let alone mitigate them, is being actively gutted. Under the Trump administration, the federal government has shed 100,000 science jobs. Funding for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration was slashed, and the critical resource site climate.gov was removed entirely. The situation is so dire that former government staff launched a crowd-funded site, climate.us, simply to rescue and provide accurate climate data to the public.
It's a complete abandonment of governance. Climate change is no longer just an environmental issue, it is a profound geopolitical crisis. When a government meets a transnational natural disaster with punitive economic tariffs rather than collaboration, and intentionally scrubs foundational scientific data, it fundamentally abandons its duty to protect the health and safety of its citizens.
How can a society manage an era of environmental triage when it is actively hollowing out its own scientific workforce? Ignorance doesn't stop the fires, it only prevents effective preparation.
When you hollow out the agencies that track chemical hazards, epidemiology, and meteorology, you leave communities flying completely blind into an escalating crisis.
Speaking of flying blind, we are seeing a rapid dismantling of financial and democratic guardrails inside the United States ahead of the November midterms as well. Before we look at these domestic shifts, a quick note for you: for more daily briefings, brain candy explainers, and classic audiobooks, visit claireandhoratio.com. So, looking at the financial sector, President Trump personally made $1.2 billion from the cryptocurrency industry in his first year in office.
Following that windfall, he pushed Congress to pass legislation known as the Genius Act. This new law integrates uninsured stablecoins directly into the regular commercial banking system. Simultaneously, he gutted the Securities and Exchange Commission's crypto enforcement program.
If a stablecoin is pegged to a dollar, why is it so risky to integrate it into a commercial bank? I mean, you are taking a lightly regulated digital token and mixing it with traditional banking infrastructure.
Because a stablecoin is not a physical dollar sitting in a vault. It is a digital token that the issuer promises is backed by assets equal to a dollar. But those tokens are not insured by the FDIC like your regular bank deposits are. If the companies issuing these stablecoins want to make a profit, they might chase higher yields by investing their reserves in riskier assets rather than safe treasury bills.
Which means if the public suddenly loses confidence and everyone tries to redeem their stablecoins for real dollars at the same time, the issuer might not have the liquid cash on hand.
And that creates a panic. Because there is no government lender of last resort in the crypto space, this panic can easily spill over into commercial banking. The Genius Act essentially invites a financial run, threatening the broader economy by destabilizing bond markets and driving up interest rates.
Taking the financial hazard from private speculators and transferring it directly onto the public banking system is the ultimate privatization of risk. And we are seeing a similar erosion of guardrails on the electoral front. Just 3 months before the November midterms, Trump delivered a primetime address stating that China meddled in the 2020 election by acquiring 220 million voter files.
He used this claim to question the security of the upcoming elections and push for the Save the America Act, which is legislation designed to ban most mail voting.
However, a declassified 2021 report from U.S. intelligence agencies contradicts this, stating with high confidence that China did not interfere in that election. What is the civic motive of a president preemptively claiming election fraud months before citizens even vote?
The aggressive election rhetoric invites what you might call a Democratic run. By broadcasting claims of foreign hacking ahead of the vote, the administration is deliberately eroding public trust in democratic institutions exactly when the public needs them most.
It creates an environment where instability is manufactured, and the resulting chaos can be leveraged for political consolidation. When you look at all of these stories today, the core pattern emerging is undeniable. From the collapse of the U.S.-Iran ceasefire in the Middle East and the fracturing of Ukraine's military command and alliances, to geopolitical tariff threats over wildfires and the structural deregulation of U.S. finance and elections.
We are witnessing a systematic removal of safety nets by those in power. Across the board, leaders are prioritizing immediate political, nationalistic, or financial gain over long-term stability and public safety.
Which leaves us with a critical question to consider as these crises compound. We talked earlier about firefighters being forced to make triage decisions on the front lines. What happens to a society when the triage mindset of the overwhelmed firefighter becomes the default operating procedure for global diplomacy and domestic governance?
In a world governed by triage, what is deemed worth saving and what is allowed to burn?
Something to carefully consider. That brings us to the end of today's Claire and Horatio Daily World Brief for July 18th, 2026. For more daily briefings, brain candy explainers, and classic audiobooks, be sure to visit claireandhoratio.com.